What's up, fellas? Welcome to Everything and More, the podcast in which we talk about everything and more. So, today's episode, we're going to be talking about the pyramids, specifically Pyramids of Giza. So, think about this for a second. In 1988, the US and Japanese engineers collectively got together to try and build this 5% scale model of the Great Pyramid. And yeah, they failed and the pyramid collapsed on itself. So, you got to think to yourself, how does that even happen, right? 1988, we have all this technology, we have internet, we have these buildings, high-rise buildings, bridges, blah, blah, blah. Yet, we can't create a 5% scaled model of the pyramids. So, keeping that in mind, let's get through with the whole podcast. It really doesn't make sense. So, what are the pyramids? Pyramids are like these huge triangular structures you always see. And when you hear about the pyramids, you think of what? Egypt. Right? But that's really not just where they are. They have them, of course, in Egypt, Sudan, Mexico, Yarara, Peru, Cambodia. Right? It's all over the planet. And there's 3 different types of pyramids from what I've seen. You have like the normal pyramids, the pyramids that you see in movies and everything, like the Great Pyramid of Giza, and then you have step pyramids, right? The pyramids you tend to see more in South America, Mexico, the smaller squares on top of one another. And then you have one called the Bent Pyramid. And this one is in Royal Necropolis of Dashur, I think is how you pronounce it, around 25 miles, 40 kilometers south of Cairo. And so the thing about this pyramid that makes it special is that halfway through its building, it goes from 52 degrees to 45 degrees. Now you ask yourself, why is that? A lot of ancient Egyptologists say because the Egyptians messed up, right? They ended up thinking they were gonna need less block, but they realized they were using more blocks, and so they decided to switch the angle to, for whatever reason. And this, it's kind of a childish reason for them to think this. It's almost thinking like these ancient Egyptians are little kids playing with Legos, whereas others might think that there is some sort of method to this madness, right? Some sort of mathematical principle or even celestial or astronomical principle. But for today, we could do a whole nother video on just that one pyramid. Today, we're going to focus on the Great Pyramids of Giza. So, keeping in mind, these pyramids are huge. We're going to talk about 2 things. How were they built and why they were built? 2 questions. Nobody up until this day, after thousands of years of them being built, nobody can answer them. So if we just look at the Great Pyramid of Giza, right, in that whole little stretch in Cairo, there's 3. Each ones were built for a separate pharaoh. We're not going to get too much into the history lessons here, but we're just going to focus pretty much on the Great Pyramid of Giza, even though they all have significance. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built from limestones. It's about 481 feet tall, 147 meters. To put that in this perspective, the Big Ben clock tower in London is 315 foot tall.
Wow.
Man, the pyramids is about 150 taller than the Big Ben clock tower. Just keeping the things in perspective. Another thing too is that 2.3 million blocks were used, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, and 1 ton is 2,000 pounds. So you can do the conversion there to see how much each block weighed. And I think, 1 pound is 2.2 kilograms? Or no, vice versa, I'm sorry. 1 kilogram is 2.2 pounds, something like that. So if you don't understand pounds, you can do the conversion there yourself. And some actually weighed as much as 60 tons. Makes no sense how they got these blocks. Some weighing up as much as 60 tons, up hundreds of feet tall. And I heard something actually from a show I was watching that in another building in ancient Egypt, they used big blocks too, and one of the stones weighed up to 250 tons. That's over 500,000 pounds. How do you lift something like that up? Even in today's day and age, we would struggle lifting something that up, lifting something that heavy up. No, so how did they do it thousands of years ago? I don't know. So first off, we have to ask ourselves, how did they even get the stones there? Well, first off, most of the stones were actually carved on site. The ones you don't see, the ones that are inside the pyramid, they were carved on site. But the pretty ones, the casing stones that were, most of them were taken out, and the pretty ones you see when you walk up to the pyramids, they were brought from far. So apparently they were carved in Aswan and Tura, which were brought. I've read they were brought over 550 miles away, 900 kilometers. They were brought in boats on the Nile River. That almost seems almost impossible to build. Just getting the stones there was just as hard as putting them up. So there's so much in when you look at the pyramids. There's so much that doesn't make sense. So we're gonna start off with the boring conventional theories. First off, let's talk about how they could have got the stones up there. First off, first one that they could have done is earth ramps. So the stones were dragged up huge ramps of earth. There's actually a lot wrong with this one, and that it just doesn't make sense. Let's start off by saying these ramps, if they weren't large enough, they were too steep, and if they were too steep, they weren't large enough. Cause, right, theoretically speak, for a ramp to be 0 degrees steep, it has to be infinitely long, right? So you're trading off two things. You're trading off the angle for the length. So the smaller the angle gets, the larger the length that you have to walk up the pyramids. The smaller the length that you have to walk up the pyramids, the larger the angle gets, right? So you have to find this perfect balance as to angle and length. And then for the straightaway ramps, right, there was different types of ramps that they said could be used. There could have been zigzag ramps, could have been spiralway ramps, but the straightaway ramps, that they would make this ramp as they went along with the pyramid taller and taller. Somebody calculated the cubic volume for this ramp to be 1.5 million cubic meters. Just the ramp. So putting things into perspective, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, the tallest building on planet Earth, is around the same volume as the ramps would have been. That doesn't make sense, right? These ramps would have to have been huge just to get, and not only that, but the effort that it would take to get these ramps from point A, the bottom of the ramp, to point B, wherever they were at in the construction of the pyramid, would have to be tremendous. Remember, these blocks were an average of 2.5 tons, thousands of pounds. So the ramps just don't hold up to scrutiny, right? It weren't large enough. They could have been too steep, too long, depending on the style of the ramps used. They weren't durable. So much wrong with this. And not only that, but they had to take apart the ramps after building them, right? So it's pretty much like you're building 3 huge structures. Technically 2 and taking 1 apart. You're building the pyramids, and then you're building the huge ramp, and then you're taking apart the huge ramp without messing up the pyramids. Doesn't make sense. The other one, another boring conventional theory, is pulleys. Large pulleys were used to pull up large, heavy stones. This one also doesn't make sense, as the pulleys would have been way too large, and it would have been almost way too much effort just to have done in, because they built the pyramids relatively fast, and the counterweight they would have used would have been extremely heavy. This one also doesn't make sense. Also, I've read that they found no evidence of pulleys or cranes being used in the pyramids, in the construction of the pyramids. So now we get to the juicy theories. One theory I found actually pretty amusing was kites. Yeah, this lady actually said that kites were used to build the pyramids. A crazy idea by Maureen Clemens, quote unquote, who runs a hair care product company and has no formal scientific training. Hilarious. So I mean, there's actually a little bit of merit to this theory. So she says the Egyptians mass-produced linen cloth, and that material could have been used for making large kites. And also that some Egyptian hieroglyphics suggested that the pyramids were raised by the invisible gods in the sky, as to what she interprets that as being some form of a kite. Is she right? I don't know, but she herself she searched help, and she went to Caltech and recruited an aeronautics engineer who actually backed her idea, and he says 2 6 by 15 feet kites in 25 mile per hour mph winds used with the combination of 3 pulleys could have easily lifted an average pyramid stone. He says it needs more study, but all the math works. So I think there's actually several things wrong with this one. First off, it doesn't take into account that the average pyramid stone was not the heaviest ones. So there were stones up to 20, 30, 40, even 50, 60 tons. And could the kites have lifted these stones? I really don't know. I just don't know. And then another thing too is when you look at how the blocks of the pyramids were placed. They were placed next to one another, and you couldn't even fit. Not you couldn't. You can't. You can't even fit a razor blade in between them. So these stones were placed extremely precise. And another crazy thing to think about. I'm bilingual, folks, so get used to it. Another cool thing to think about is that all the stones from all the sides, they meet up at a single point. What does that mean? That means one small mistake at the bottom of the pyramid would have a domino effect up to the pyramid, and it would be all messed up, and it wouldn't come up to a single point, but it nicely converges into a single point. Ancient Egyptologists call these type of people pyramidids. Or what is it? Pyramidids? Idiots! Pretty much. Are they idiots, or are they just people trying to figure out how these freaking pyramids were built? There's really no working theory as of now that scientists, engineers, ancient Egyptologists have all agreed on and said, boom, this is how the pyramids were built and this is why they were built. So another very juicy one, the next one we're going to tackle, is that, of course, everybody's favorite theory as to how the pyramids were built: aliens. So, it said that if workers transported in position about 10 stones daily, if they miraculously did this 10 stones a day, it would have taken them over 664 years to finish. But the pyramids took no more than 20 years to finish. What does this mean? This means 431 stones were moved daily. And this possibly could mean, some people believe, means that this was only done with help. Extraterrestrial help. Aliens gave ancient Egyptians supernatural abilities and knowledge to construct the pyramids. Now, if you're going to listen to one part of the podcast and one part only, I suggest it be this one. This is the crazy statistics about the pyramid that it makes no sense, and it gets me to this day. Here's some math of the Great Pyramid of Giza. You take the perimeter of the pyramid, and you divide by 2 times its height. It equals pi, 3.14. To its first 15 digits, which I'm not going to recite because I have no clue. I didn't know 3.1459. That's all I got down. But pi was not calculated to its first 4 digits until the 6th century. And the pyramids were built around 3rd century BCE. How does that happen? It does not make sense. How did they have such How did they have such a knowledge and precision to build something and have it equal this number to be so exact? Not only that, but something even more miraculously, and you can even check this right now as you're watching or listening to this, whether you're on YouTube, Spotify, or whatever. Go on Google Earth, type in Great Pyramid of Giza or Cairo, Egypt, whatever, and then find the pyramids, and you'll notice that the pyramid almost perfectly aligns with true north, south, east, west. The difference is around 1/20th of a degree. And now keep in mind that the Earth's magnetic poles shift over time. So it's actually possible that the time these pyramids were built, true north, south, east, and west was perfectly positioned with the pyramids, with zero marginal error. And another crazy part of this is that the pyramids were built around 3,500 years before the invention of the compass. So they must have had some extremely precise and extremely intelligent and intricate way of measuring north, south, east, and west. So you got also, when you look at this and you hear this, you have to think of yourself from an engineering perspective, at least using our logics in today's day and age, as to why did they have to make something so precise? Even goes with the pi, the digits of pi. Think about it, because when you look at it like this, you're an engineer, and you're gonna build something that's 1 inch. If you're gonna make that 1 inch plus or minus 1/10 of an inch, it's gonna cost X. If you're gonna make that 1 inch plus or minus 1/100th of an inch, it's gonna cost Y, and Y costs more than X. If you're gonna make that 1 inch plus or minus 1/1000th of an inch, it's gonna cost Z, and Z costs more than Y and X. So the more precise you build and create and make something, the more expensive, the more time, the more resources it's going to take. So when they made something so precise to the digits of pi, to lined up to true north, south, east, and west, how much time did they invest? And not only that, but why? Correct? Why did it have to be so precise to the digits of pi, true north, south, east, and west? And it's linked to the cosmos too. When the third pyramid was finished in 3rd century BC, the top of the pyramid was directly in line with the star Alcuini. I think that's how you pronounce this. So our solar system actually revolves around this star, yet there's no written record about this cluster of stars until 2nd century BC. How could they have known that, and why did it have to be precise with all three of those things? And not only that, last one I'm going to give you, I'm sure you can find lot more interesting facts about the pyramids of Giza and the Great Pyramid of Giza, is that the 3 pyramids actually line up to the constellation of Orion, which is important due to its link to Osiris. Osiris was the ruler of the dead and king of the living, which we'll talk about later as to why the pyramids were built, and we'll link to this as to how it could have been a transportation into the next life. So how could have all this been possible? Right? We gave you all these crazy statistics and facts about the pyramids, and it's how could have all this been possible? A lot of people believe that this could have been done with acoustic levitation, the same way local legends suggest that the Stonehenges in England were transported. Anti-gravity techniques such as acoustic levitation allowing them to easily move massive objects. Maybe aliens had these crazy devices, equipment, whatever it may be, and which allowed them to easily move these massive objects and place them so precise next to each other atop of another. And this isn't so far-fetched as you may think. When I bring up this next story I'm going to tell you. Coral Castle. Look it up, fellas. Pause the podcast right now. Stop watching. Do a little bit of research. I'm only going to tell you so much, but in Coral Castle, this was a castle built in it's more like a bunch of structures integrally put together. This was built in Florida in the 20th century, 1900s, so a couple of years ago. But probably more correct if we say a couple of decades ago. One man built by himself a castle in amazing structures of megalithic stones weighing up to 6 tons each. So one man did all of this by himself without anybody being aware. He never showed anyone at what he did, and he never told people how he did it. So how could this one man move these huge, crazy, heavy objects by himself? The reason he did this, you can look up more if you want later. The reason he did this is that soon before as he was about to get married with his fiance, she broke up with him, and so he got really sad, and he constructed this beautiful structure for her in Florida. And then he passed away, and it was sold. One of his long distance cousins in America acquired what he built, and then that person sold it, and now it's like it's a park in Florida. You can look it up. It's called Coral Castle. It's amazing, beautiful, and it doesn't make sense how one single man single-handedly constructed this by himself. So now we get to my theory as to how they were built, and other people's theories too, but I really like this one. I'm not saying this is it. I'm not saying any of these are it, but we're just going to talk about this one last, and then we'll talk about why they were built. So my theory is they had an extreme level of mind consciousness. They could access parts of their brains that we can't even understand. We can't even grasp the concept of what they were able to do with their minds. Right? It said something, I don't know, humans can access 5% of their brain. Right, we can access an extremely small amount, part of our brain. And you look at that one movie, I think it's called Lucy, with Scarlett Johansson, where she's able to access, she takes this one pill or something, right? This one drug, and she slowly, as the movie goes, she's able to access more and more and more part of her brain. And as that happens, she's able to do more and more and more. And then at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, just skip 10-20 seconds if you want to watch this movie and you don't want to know what happens at the end. Spoiler, at the end of the movie, she reaches 100% capacity of her brain that she can use, and she pretty much becomes everything, an infinite dimensional being. Okay, so what I'm saying is that ancient Egyptians weren't necessarily to this extent, but they could have done something closely to it. They had access to their brains that made it so they could easily lift up these megalithic stones. And how did they get there? I don't know. Could have been through spiritual, just being highly spiritual aware of themselves, through meditation, rituals, aliens maybe. I don't even know. But that's just an interesting theory I thought I might throw up there. And it's actually a pretty cool one. And there's a lot more evidence to suggest it. But we're not going to talk about too much of it right now. And so the next thing I want to talk about is why they were built. So a funny one I saw, just briefly talk over this, is I remember when Ben Carson was running for the presidency, he said he said a lot of stupid stuff. I mean, you got to give the man credit. The guy is a genius, right? I think he was the first person to successfully remove separate Siamese twins. So the guy's a genius. But just because you're a genius in one aspect doesn't mean you're going to be smart or even good at another thing, right? So his thing is medicine, not necessarily politics or theorizing as to how the pyramids were built. So he's a big Christian, right? And when I heard him say this, I thought, oh, it was just stupid Ben Carson. But no, it's like something that a lot of Christians, not a lot of Christians, but some Christians believe, is that the pyramids were built by a biblical figure called Joseph, and it was used for storing grain in massive floods, right? And that's somewhere they could store their grains and keep them safe. Nonetheless, this is pretty silly, and it's probably not why they were built. We can just skip that one for real quick. Next is, this one's like the most, next theory as to why they were built is the most accepted theory, but a lot of people suggest that there's barely any evidence for this, and the pyramids were built to protect the remains of pharaohs, right? And it was, like I said, a lot of ancient Egyptologists would just go along with this, but deep down inside they know this isn't real. And but it could have been something to guide, it could have been used to guide the dead to the afterlife, because a lot of people believe the hieroglyphics inside the pyramid could have been read after you passed away, so your soul, your spirit, whatever, was able to read the instructions and able to process that information for it to help to get to the afterlife. And there's a lot of passageways inside the pyramid that people say could have been used to lead the spirits, souls, or whatever into another chamber that could have been, I don't know, it could have led them to the afterlife. But that's another thing too. And on top of that, since we're in the subject of afterlife, I'm going to tell you this much right now. This is my opinion of a fact. This is a fact of my opinion. That the pyramids were not built by slaves. Take it to the bank. A lot of people say the pyramids were built by slaves, up to 100,000 slaves. I call baloney on that. Bullocks. That's mad. Because if a slave were to build something over decades, I don't care the intent of the master, the slave master, that slave is not going to build it to his best of his ability. If you look at the pyramids, it's so precise with such little error as to all the blocks meet up into all the bottom puta que pariu, mano. I'm sorry. My Portuguese sometimes gets the best of me. All the blocks in the bottom meet up to a single block up top. That is extremely precise. It lines up almost perfectly the true north, south, east, and west. And it's just so much mathematical and celestial principles that are so precise. And you're telling me slaves, hundreds and thousands of slaves, built these pyramids and made them so precise because they were just so willing to help the pharaoh or whoever they might have been working for is bullocks. These the pharaohs back in the days were almost seen as sort of demigods. They're like these people, these, like I said, demigods, these god-like beings that people around just completely respected and had the utmost respect for. And so the people who worked on the pyramids, farmers, blue collar workers, cooks, whoever it might have been, these people who worked on the pyramids worked on them willingly. They did it because they saw a benefit from doing it. Their thought process is, if I do this to the best of my abilities and I follow the instructions, the pharaoh or the god or whatever I will be rewarded with it to a path to the afterlife and so on. So in the bottom of their hearts, they believed that this was the best possible thing for them at the time, helping build the pyramids to the best of their abilities. You can't make unwilling workers build such a beautiful, precise structure that not only is so crazy, but it's withstood the testament of time. They say time destroys all, but not the pyramids, because the pyramids have been up for almost thousands of years, but it's almost perfect. Nothing, I mean, sure, a lot of stuff inside has been robbed by tomb raiders, but the pyramids outside, things that humans can't control, it's pretty much perfect. So you tell me. Another thing too is make it a drinking game. Every time I say it doesn't make sense, you take a shot. Because none of this makes sense. It doesn't make sense. Shot. Next theory. Power plants. Yeah, this is another juicy one. So some people actually say that the pyramids could have been large, intricate, Tesla-like power plants used for generating electricity. True or not, I find it really interesting, and I don't think it's that far-fetched at all. There's layers of isolative and conductive materials in pyramids, just like an electricity cable. And not only that, but there's also carvings that showed ancient Egyptians holding up these lanterns type of things, but they weren't fueled by fire. They were fueled by what some believe to be wireless electricity. So I'm just giving you the facts and interpretation of the facts. You can take that as to how you want. Now, the craziest reason why they were built, which I don't think it's BS, and I don't think is that far-fetched if you think about how large our solar system is and how big our universe is, right? We're just one planet. We're just one tiny planet inside of one tiny solar system, inside of one tiny galaxy, inside of the universe. And when I do say tiny, I do mean relatively tiny. Our planet Earth is tiny compared to other planets. Our sun is really tiny compared to other stars. And then Milky Way galaxy is extremely tiny compared to other galaxies. I'll see if I can put up some pictures in the screen for you guys watching on YouTube. But just look at it, like, planet Earth is really small. Milky Way galaxy is really small. And the sun, you've seen those videos on Instagram and Facebook. The sun is a really, really, really small star. So, is that grounds for extraterrestrial beings traveling from other galaxies, solar systems, or planets, whatever? And a lot of people say, and this is like the History Channel Ancient Aliens type of things, at least I'm pretty sure this is what they were saying, is that these pyramids were used as fueling stations for aliens. Silly? Fudge yes. True? Maybe. Probably not. Probably yes. Who knows? Doesn't make sense. Take a shot. So why would the aliens even come down here in the first place? Well, Earth is a planet full of resources. Gold, for one, everybody knows, an extremely rare metal, and not only rare, but it's useful. Gold is one of the most conductive metals And we use it. When we do space travel, we use gold. You look at those satellites right now that circle above us, right? That gives us signals, that gives us internet or whatever. These satellites above us and spacecrafts and everything, they have gold on them because they're really durable and it's really conductive. Who knows? Maybe aliens somehow knew that Earth had a lot of gold and other resources, and they came down here to use, and they built these pyramids as fueling stations for gold, maybe because they wanted to mine for gold, or they wanted to mine for other resources, or this is the stupid stuff you hear on TV because they wanted to genetically modify humans. Right? I mean, I wouldn't call it stupid, but I don't. I'm not a big fan of that, right? Because they said Homo sapiens to humans, there's like one missing gene on it, and it doesn't make sense as to how humans were evolved from one to the other, and so this calls for aliens came down and genetically engineered us, and now we're humans because of aliens. Who knows? Probably not. I don't want to call everything silly, but it could have happened. Who knows? I like to believe the conventional theory as to we all evolved through genetic mutations that are advantageous to its environment. I mean, I'll talk more about evolution at length in another podcast. But I don't think we were genetically engineered by aliens. But that's another thing, another theory as to why people were saying aliens came down here. Could have been for resources, could have been for experiments, whatever it may be, but they used the pyramids as fueling stations. I was watching TV, and this one lady said about the pyramids is, I don't know what the pyramids were for. I just know that whenever it was running, I wouldn't want to be in there. I don't know. Who knows? Nothing makes sense. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. That's 3 shots. If you've been playing along with the game, you're probably really drunk by now. And that's probably what I'm going to do right now. Get drunk on more information and work on the next podcast. So if you guys have any ideas as to what I should do next, you want to contact me, you want to talk about random stuff, feel free to DM me on Instagram at ENM Podcast. ENM Podcast. Everything and More Podcast on Instagram. Shoot me a DM, do whatever you want. And for those of you watching on YouTube, don't leave just yet. I got a surprise for you. And you're in for a treat. Anyways, guys, or should I say fellas, take it easy, keep it pimpin', and peace.